Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions, and this time we are talking about the Crusades. History summarized by Blue. Now, when it comes to the Crusades, really the only one I know any sort of like significant information about is the Fourth Crusade. I read a book about it like over a year ago. It was a fantastic book. The wider premise of the book was also discussing really this was a book written in like the 60s, so it's a bit older on the historiography. Cannot remember the name of it, um but it was a fantastically written book, and if I remember, I'll put it in my pinned comment in the comment section exactly what the title of the book was. But yeah, it was written in the 60s, and it was like it talked really about sort of like where the East versus West European divide kind of like started. Um, and this author really pointed it to the divide was curable until the Fourth Crusade, and then the Fourth Crusade kind of made it impossible to reconcile. Fourth Crusade is a tragedy. It is so sad. I mean, what gets done in the other Crusades is also really fucked up. But the Fourth Crusade is just it's it's a mess, man. Venice was real fucked up in with what they did with the Fourth Crusade, man. Like those backstabbing sons of bitches. Oh my, they were so scummy. Like, Blue, you got your Venice has some answering to do for the Fourth Crusade. I hope you fucking talk about it. If he doesn't talk about the Fourth Crusade here, I'm gonna be upset. And how Venice was an absolute scumbag.
If you clicked on this video looking for a summary of a failed multi-century attempt to recapture a small religiously relevant municipality, then you're in the right place.
Woo.
However, if you want to know why said campaign is significant in the broader context of world history, then I encourage you to give a look to these 3 videos linked on screen here on the history of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, as well as this video on the broad religious history of the first millennium AD around the time of the Muslim conquest, which serves more or less as a direct context to these here crusades. For some highly expedited backstory, Rome wasn't Christian, then part of it split off and became the Byzantine Empire, which owned Jerusalem for a good long while until it, well, didn't when Islam popped up and took it in part of its rapid conquest of Persia, the Levant, North Africa, and Spain. Then, 300 or so years later, the Seljuk Turks, who were also Muslim, conquered Anatolia, which made the Byzantines, who previously owned Anatolia, a little skittish, and our story begins from here. Pope Urban II heard news of this and, in my opinion, was likely excited for 2 possible reasons. First, if he called some sort of war to aid his fellow Christian kingdom, he would then have some really good leverage for asking the Greek Orthodox Byzantines to convert back to Roman Catholicism and end the recent schism between the churches. Second, if all of Europe was to be engaged in...
Okay, so... Yes, so really up until the Fourth Crusade, I think a lot... The divide between, going again off of top of my head here, so I could be a little bit wrong, please do correct me if I am. The schism was largely, from what it sounds like, was a thing believed to be curable, fixable, like patched up. There really wasn't, I feel like, by the First Crusade, and really up until the Fourth Crusade, there wasn't too much of difference between the two Christianities. It was really more so based upon the center of like church power, and kind of also like that relationship of clergy power was a little bit different, I believe. I'm not too certain how different, but just based on my understanding of what I remember, that's how I kind of was able to grasp it. But yeah, they were largely, it was believed that, they could be brought back together.
In this, let's call it a...
And then the Fourth Crusade happened because of a Venetian doge who was a piece of shit. Blue, you better talk about him. I'll be upset.
cross aid, then they'd have reason to stop fighting each other as they had been for the past few centuries. Win-win, right? So Urban takes up his keyboard and starts Deus Vult spamming like mad. Now it's about time for my routine disclaimer on the Crusades. It's no secret that I just don't like them. The moral and spiritual justifications for 9 bloody, repeated wars eludes me, to put it lightly. I get it, the Holy Land means a lot, but you need to call it a day after like 3 tries tops, not 9. I mostly like to describe the Crusades with the word messy. Like them or
War is also a pretty, like, kind of boring thing to talk about, which is kind of why the Fourth Crusade was actually really interesting to read about, because while it is one that there is fighting in it, there is a war happening, it's more so, it's very, I would say it's probably the most, at least, again, going off the top of my head, it's the most probably political and consequential of the Crusades, depending upon the perspective. Like, from a European perspective, the divide that is found in Europe along East versus West lines, the Fourth Crusade is probably the most consequential. In terms of Muslim and Christian Western relationship, First Crusade is probably the most consequential there. But yeah, the Crusades as a whole are kind of just boring, because they really are just like the Pope calling forth the armies of Europe to go to the Holy Land, and then they just, some of them are successes, most of them are fails. It's just kind of boring, dude. And I say this as someone that actually was used to be really interested in the Crusades. But that was probably largely due to misconceptions as a wee lad.
hate them, you have to agree that these wars were a mess from start to finish, plagued with infighting on all sides and barely effective, if effective at all. Yes, the Crusades were about religion and theoretically in service to God, but my point is that overall they did much more harm than good, even when the motive did come from a place of good faith. Remember, throughout history, religion has motivated and influenced a ton of events, but the participants were always still people, who would often do people-y things like compromise their religious beliefs for more human-scale motivations, like money, or land, or power, or mass murder, like I explained in the case before. Christianity in itself isn't bad, it's just getting a twist from some very human factors, and Islam and Judaism engage in the same thing too on some occasions. It's hardly a reason to condemn an entire religion. So considering all that, I'm going to do my best to be fair, and I'll be rating all 9 Crusades based on how threatened Christendom was, how well they actually defended it, how much they at least tried to do something good, and finally how much needless looting and pillaging happened. Let's start with
Oh, I know where the Fourth Crusade's ranking.
Crusade number 1. Originally, it set out to give the Byzantines their land back.
I feel like the First Crusade is really the first and second are probably the only ones that are actually going to rank, like, is actually doing what was supposed to be the goal
From the Seljuks. And while this may not be number 1 on God's priority list, it's still valid and justified.
For simplicity, I'm putting all Crusaders in gold, all Muslims in green, except the Byzantines, they are always purple.
From a certain perspective, so we're off to a decent start. Then after that they pushed south into the Levant, and then set about saving Jerusalem! Except Jerusalem was actually doing fine, and actually there was a bit of theological golden age budding at the time, which was pretty cool by most accounts, but nope, Siege pretty much trashed the city, so that's gonna get some points off, probably a yellow card in there too. After taking Jerusalem, the Crusaders set up a few kingdoms in the area and left a few soldiers behind, and then hightailed it home. So our first crusade comes out alright. The Byzantines were on the brink, and Europe came to its rescue. It was really more political.
Wasn't there some mass murder in the First Crusade? Like, and wasn't it Christian on Christian, or is that a different crusade? Is it the second or third? I know there is some pretty well-known slaughter that happened that the Crusaders did that I think was on fellow Christians.
And territorial than it was inherently religious in nature, but it's as fair as any other instance of allies helping allies. A holy city or two was sacked, but at least their heart was in the right place. And in the end, the Byzantines got some of their stuff back. This one I'm mostly good with. I'll give the First Crusade a soft 4 urbans out of 5. Next we have the Second Crusade, which like the first was called in response to a loss of Christian territory. In this case, the Turkish Zengid dynasty took over the Crusader state of Edessa, which was one of the many states founded by the Christians after the previous war ended. The difference with this crusade is that it failed horribly. This crusade, while theoretically noble and honorable in its aims, failed so horribly that I have to give it 2 participation awards out of 5. Third on our list is the, Third Crusade. Yeah, that one. This one was the cleanup crew for the Second Crusade, because after their failure weakened their holdings in the Holy Land, Jerusalem was taken by Saladin and his cool new Ayyubid Caliphate in 1187. Anyway, the Third Crusade is when things become squarely about Jerusalem, and this is also probably the one that you know best. Number 3 is known for such famous faces as Richard the Lionheart, Saladin, the plot of the original Assassin's Creed, all those fun guys. There are a bunch of fascinating, neat little stories from this one that I just don't have time to get into right now, but from a broad military history perspective, this one is also really cool because of how many factors are involved, how many cities are in play, and how many people volunteered. Of all the Crusades, this one is definitely the most religiously fervent. Morally justified or not, this one was motivated. Crusades 1 and 2 were really just about getting some land back, but Jerusalem had taken on a totally new religious significance in the 12th century that, from my perspective, is rather sudden and unexpected. But hey, it worked. People were volunteering by the thousands to quote-unquote rescue Jerusalem. Unfortunately, despite some solid victories won at Acre and Arsuf, albeit despite some non-negligible massacre in the former case, Richard and the Crusaders never managed to recapture Jerusalem. So despite genuine intentions to retake the city, it didn't pan out. I'll give the Third Crusade 3 Assassin's Creeds out of 4.
Why 4? I don't get why change from 5 to 4?
So, we've talked about the Fourth Crusade before on this channel, and I really don't like talking about it. The Greek in me
is it because of your precious Venice blue?
is just plain sad that Constantinople got sacked, and the Venice enthusiast in me feels guilty for being deeply enamored of the place that did the sacking.
You didn't just do the fucking sacking. You did some Venice did some Game of Thrones level backstabbing and manipulating and scumbaggery for the I cannot read it. Read what the Doge of Venice did in the Fourth Crusade. That motherfucker was just a horrible human being. Just a horrible human. Oh my god.
It's a lose-lose scenario for me. And I think the speed at which these guys just totally gave up on their divine quest to save Jerusalem in order to sack a fellow Christian city says a lot about what the Crusades...
You're summarizing it a bit too much there. It is because they didn't have money, and they screwed themselves. When the Crusaders got to Italy, they had a problem. They didn't have ships. And they didn't quite have the money for the ships either. There was some, I think, drama going on with the Pope as well. And so, the Crusaders camped out on this island because it was more defensible. I think I've talked about this before on a previous video, but I can't remember where. They camped out on this island for a little while. Well, they needed food, and so the Doge of Venice offered food, and he wasn't charging them for it. He was just like, here, I'll ship you guys some food on your little island while this drama plays out. And then the Doge is like, hey, I'll also give you... Now, I'm also simplifying this heavily as well. There's more to it, but I'm simplicity's sake, we're just talking really about what the Doge did. He also then goes to the leaders and he's like, I'll also provide you ships, but you have to help me retake, I think, Riga. You have to help me he was like, you got to help me retake one of my cities along the Baltic coast, and then I will drop you guys off at Egypt, because the goal of the Fourth Crusade was Egypt during, Egypt was having a civil war at this time. And the Pope wanted to get in on that because he thought of it as an advantageous time, which it was. It would have been actually, probably if they had gone to Egypt, it would have been a successful crusade. But they didn't. They go to the city the Doge wants. They retake it. There is some slaughter and some pillaging done, which isn't good. But they then winter over there, and then the Doge comes in and he's like, hey guys, I have he manages to finagle them somehow. I remember. He's like, hey guys, I have the rightful ruler of the Byzantine Empire, of the Eastern Roman Empire. Because to Western Europeans, the belief is inheritance goes from father to son, right? Rome, Eastern Rome was different. Eastern Rome did not work that way. They did not go from father to son directly, not all of the time. That wasn't their tradition. And so it did not get passed to the son after the death of father. It went to someone else, who was currently ruling Constantinople. And so the Doge was like, hey, I got the rightful ruler, but we're not going to have to do any fighting. We're going to stroll up to the walls of Constantinople with our army, and we're going to show them their rightful ruler. They're going to open the gates of Constantinople, welcome us with cheers, pay us, and then we will go to Egypt. It was essentially what he was doing. Well, that didn't fucking happen. That didn't happen. The Doge of Venice was a scumbag, and then when it was all said and done, after Constantinople was sacked, the Eastern Romans went through like 3 fucking emperors in like a few months due to this. The Venetian Doge took some land for himself, well, for Venice, and then some of the other parties also snatched some land from the Eastern Roman Empire. It was just, scumbaggery.
Really meant to some of the Crusaders, as we'll see later on, especially. If you want to learn more about Constantinople getting sacked and the Byzantine Empire getting partitioned to the Crusaders, which, I mean, just look at this bloody mess of a map right here, watch one of these 2 videos. In the meantime, the Fourth Crusade gets -4 frustrated rants out of 4 stolen bronze horses. Can you tell that I'm salty about this? From here on out, the
Give more negative points. Give more negative points. It is the worst one.
Crusades delve further and further into ineffective warmongering, as the protracted Fifth Crusade was called in 1213 to retake Jerusalem to ultimately disastrous ends, and so gets 1 starved-out army forcibly retreating out of 5. The Sixth Crusade, however, is much nicer since almost no actual fighting happened on account of the diplomatically adept Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. Jerusalem was simply negotiated over to the Christians and no one went to
Meanwhile, the Byzantines are trying to reassemble them. That's another story.
hell for murder. Yay! This crusade gets a score of 3 Art of the Deals out of 5 disenchanted ghostwriters. The thing with the Sixth Crusade is that this one was called and waged by Frederick himself, not the Pope as the previous 5 had been. Also, shortly after this crusade ended, Jerusalem was sacked by the Muslims and almost completely destroyed. Now this, don't get me wrong, was a dick move through and through. One of the most important things to remember in history is that no matter how much you might want to attack or defend a culture, that culture is almost guaranteed to have done both great things and totally dickish things, and a black and white moral judgment is pretty much impossible as a result. Real history is complicated. Who knew? Anyway.
Well, you can still judge people on their morality with your modern morality. Of course, you can acknowledge at the same time, like, hey, this was accepted at the time. Does not make it okay, though, right? Like, I think we have, enough brain power to understand that simple concept that, hey, this may have been acceptable at the time. It's still fucked up, right? Like, it's not a hard thing to, like, disconnect yourself or whatever, right? It's not hard to do. It's not hard to be like, hey, that's real fucked up. Even if it was acceptable at the time, that's still fucked up. People should have been better in history. But we weren't, and it's a fucking shame.
Following that trend of minimal papal oversight, the 7th and 8th Crusades, which Louis IX launched, and finally Henry III's 9th Crusade all set out to, say it with me, retake Jerusalem. For various reasons, they each, unsurprisingly, ended in failure, and they collectively get 1 Napoleon out of 5 rushes in the winter. Because at that point, why on earth are you still trying? Now that those are over, have you noticed that these affairs get rapidly less noble and religiously justifiable as time went on? The Crusades were each theoretically called to defend the cross, but the most they ever really did was defend some territory that happened to be owned by Christians in Crusades 1 and 2, and then after that the Crusaders all developed that really unhealthy obsession with Jerusalem. After war number 3, and after sacking number 2 at the most, we all need to agree to just go home and let it go. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Christians, Jews, and Muslims died in 2 centuries of war for a whole lot of nothing at the end of the day. Please let this be a lesson in when to quit. Now, it may seem like I'm just bashing on the idea of Christians crusading, but I maintain that there is one crusade that was never called, but should have been. If there was ever one instance in history in which Christianity as an idea, as a culture, as a way of life was genuinely threatened and needed saving, it was the fall of Constantinople in 1453 to the Ottomans. Yeah, Jerusalem is cool and it's really great to have your gods
Yeah, from a, religious sort of obligation sort of thing, that one should have had a crusade called.
home city under your wing, but Constantinople was the world's foremost repository of classical and early Christian scholarship, as well as all manner of Christian art, and an incalculable amount of that was simply lost in the fall of the city. If there was ever a time that Christendom was really in peril, it was then, and neither the Pope nor the European powers did anything substantive to help. But here's why I personally think there wasn't one. There's a lot of land and loot to be had on the road to recapturing Jerusalem, but there's next to nothing to gain from helping someone else keep what they already have, even if they're also Christian. Although, given how the Fourth Crusade went, I wouldn't be surprised if the combined forces of Europe showed up to help the Ottomans besiege the city instead. So that's my rundown on the 9 Crusades that did happen and the one that didn't, but should've. As was the case with the last video, I highly suggest you watch part 3. This one takes a break from
And that was History Summarized, the Crusades. This was a good episode. He's definitely done better, but this is also one of his older ones. This one's like 7 years old or something like that. So it's okay. I'm not up city spaghetti about it. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed as well. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.